Welcome to episode number 4 of Bigger Than Sports. I'm your host, Chris Williamson, and joining me for my 4th episode is New York Liberty guard Jocelyn Willoughby, who's an amazing woman, had a decorated career at UVA, now in New York, doing great things on the court as well as off. Jocelyn, thank you so much for joining me today.
No, thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this show. I've watched a few episodes, and it's been so inspiring. So I'm really thankful to be on this show.
Well, that makes me feel great. You were drafted by the Phoenix Mercury in the 2020 WNBA draft, but you were traded on draft night to the New York Liberty.
So what has it been like to begin your career near your hometown of East Orange, New Jersey?
It's been a huge dream come true. That night was a whirlwind of emotions. Thinking initially like I'm going all the way across the country, starting a new chapter of my life. But then to be traded to my hometown team, it's been amazing. I had all of my coaches, teammates, friends, and family who've supported me on a Zoom call, all watching the draft night together. And so when I got traded, it's kind of like I now get to give back to all the people and communities who poured into me.
Yeah, it's beautiful to have that village supporting you. Now, you grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood. Can you take our viewers, through the early years of your life and what that was like?
One of the things, you don't recognize your upbringing or appreciate it truly until you get older and reflect and are exposed to people who've had different upbringings. And so going back to my community, obviously having parents and family, but then my first school, Johnny Cochran, predominantly Black, and just realizing things like there are people who still don't know Lift Every Voice and Sing, that it's like the Black national anthem. But I knew that before the Star Spangled Banner. So it was things like that that I reflect on in my upbringing, where I'm like, wow, that's different.
What was your first moment that you remember encountering racism?
Definitely when I went to high school. That was my transition to entering the space of PWIs, predominantly white institutions, and it was the culture shock. I remember my first week was just challenging, and I think now it's funny but not funny. My mom, every day she would meet me when I came home off the bus. How was school? How are things going? Because she, as a parent, was nervous. I think my dad was also nervous, but less open about it, less expressive of it. And so, I would tell my mom some of the challenges and just, she began questioning, like, did I send my child to the wrong school? But, long story short, the experience at the end of it was great. But that culture shock in the beginning where, I felt like people were questioning me. I unashamedly wear my hair in cornrows. And people were like, oh, do you always wear your hair like that? That wasn't something I had thought of prior to that moment. So just going through people questioning me and my identity, me beginning to question myself, like, do I belong here? Am I good enough? All the things that come with it was definitely a challenge.
You immersed yourself in the equality inclusion team, which promoted diversity and equity. You were also part of a Black awareness group, and you asked college coaches on your college visits about issues related to their respective communities. That's not something, most teenagers have the wherewithal and the insight to ask. So my question to you is, where does that passion and that commitment to giving back to your community and making sure everybody's treated equally, where does that come from?
That's a great question. I think it's definitely in part because of my upbringing, my parents, teachers, coaches, everybody, my village really, and just kind of the impact that they've had on me. I think I've recognized how privileged and blessed I am. And I know how big just having certain opportunities or doors open to you, and being exposed to certain things, how that can literally transform your life, right? And so sometimes I think I have to sit back and question, why me? How is it that, I have been privileged in the ways that I have, where I've gotten to enter the spaces, be a part of the conversations that I have been able to. And so I think have gained an appreciation for that for sure, but also there's responsibility that comes with it, I think. And part of the responsibility is one, to show up, right? Like if you have an invitation to be at a table, to be a part of a conversation, then I think you need to take that opportunity, because there's so many people who aren't afforded the opportunity, and you get to help represent and advocate for them.
Jocelyn, you brought up the fact that you went to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, where the Unite the Right rally happened in 2017, led by neo-Nazis and white supremacists. What was that experience like as a student at UVA during such a turbulent time?
That was definitely an eye-opening experience, as a college student. The women's basketball team, we were coming back from our international trip to Costa Rica as the events were unfolding. And so literally on Twitter, you see news feeds from CNN and all these other media outlets. And then it hits you and it's like, they're talking about where we're about to go back to. They're talking about our university. All of us in our UVA gear walking through the airport, and some people commenting, oh, I wouldn't want to go where they're going, being Charlottesville. And so it was definitely scary, to say the least. But I think after the rally, after the tragic death, as a community, we came together. And so I think that moment was kind of what set me up for the rest of my UVA career. It's really what motivated me to get immersed with, one, the Black community, to get immersed and in touch with the Charlottesville community, to understand some of the history of the school, and not just what, the main dominant narrative is in terms of this is Jefferson's university, but understanding that enslaved laborers and Black people have, built this university.
Switch to the WNBA now, and obviously the 2020 season was unlike anyone before. It's one thing to watch the basketball inside the bubble and hear about the activism that you all are doing, but describe to me how grueling it was to not only focus on playing ball, but also standing up for Black lives, specifically Black women, with the Say Her Name campaign.
It was hard at moments, but it was also so inspiring. We were fortunate, I think, to be able to have, as a league, as individuals, some of the education and background. So partnering with the African American Policy Forum, that's kind of spearheaded the Say Her Name campaign, and actually having the opportunity to talk to the mothers of different victims, to hear their stories, to hear their personhood, their being, was amazing, because that motivated us. Even though it was heavy and hard to hear, it motivated us to think about, what does the season mean? What are we doing? What can we do? But it was also heavy to hear the mothers telling these stories of their daughters, and then going out to play the next day, or to have a video and moment of silence that just grounds us and reminds us why we were playing the season, what we dedicated to before a game. And then it's like, all right, got to get the emotions together because we're going to go play this game. So I think it was hard to balance the two, but at the same time, it gave us a platform. And I think that was one of the biggest things I learned, is that as a league, as a collection of women, there's strength in that.
Were there any specific words or messages from the mothers of the police brutality victims that really spoke to you or touched you?
I think one of the biggest and also disheartening, was that it's almost like nobody is safe. I'll put it that way. And as different mothers were talking, they're thinking, you'll see on the news a story, and oftentimes is blaming the victim for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, for, being involved with a partner who was, a suspect of a crime, so on and so forth. And a lot of times we can, in some ways, dehumanize, but also distance ourselves and think, oh, that will never happen to me. That will never happen to my daughter. We're in different worlds. But you're not safe. Somebody who's college educated, who's going on to do great things, who's a great person. I think that was the thing. It wasn't just about the mothers telling the stories of the cases and just the tragedy, but also who their daughters were, who they were aspiring to be. And realizing that you can be on a straight and narrow path and your life can be taken and it seems like nobody cares. That in itself, I was like, wow, in all that I am and all that I try and be, my life can be taken and it cannot matter to anybody. And so just sitting with that and thinking, one, like what is my legacy going to be, or what will it be? If I were to go today, would anybody care? Would anybody, demand justice or question? How quickly would it go by in the new media news feed or news cycle?
There was so much outrage over the Jacob Blake shooting, so much so that the NBA players decided to strike their games, starting with the Bucks, and then the WNBA teams followed suit. Walk me through that experience of deciding not to play when that's not an easy decision.
Honestly, that was a confusing time because so much happened so quickly and so many decisions were being made where it's like, what are we doing? What's happening? Just needing clarity. I think on that evening, we had to visualize the league and just came together to regroup. And I think one of the biggest things for us was figuring out or recommitting ourselves to why we decided to play this season in the first place. I'm a little skeptical of calling it a strike because I think one of the points that I made when we met as a league and had some of these discussions is that I don't necessarily see it as a boycott or a strike because I think that's something that's prolonged and you don't kind of resume activities until the change that you demand is made, which I think is different than what we did. I think it was a moment of expression of solidarity, which I think was important, and that in itself grabbed the attention of a lot of people, and I think caused important conversations to continue to be had.
And what were some of the conversations that you've had with your teammates, like Sabrina Ionescu, as far as social justice? Because oftentimes, there can be that awkward tension between players who are white and black who get along great when everything's going gravy, but when you have to deal with hard issues like racism, like police brutality, it can create some friction, or it can lead to great change. So what were some of those conversations like?
I think the conversations that we had were in large part of giving us a space and opportunity to process everything that was going on. So as a person of color, as a woman of color, how certain events were triggering to me or to some of my teammates. And so to be able to both speak and listen in those conversations were important. But even, for white teammates, figuring out, understanding how they're feeling, for international teammates to figure out how they're feeling, for coaches, right, who have some level of authority and power to figure out how they're feeling. And I think it was so important for all of us to talk, with our different identities, with our different positions of power, or I guess levels of power, how we're all affected by these events in some way, but differently. And so coming to that understanding, but also trying to figure out how we can support each other. I think that was a huge piece of it.
Lastly, what can people do right now? Something tangible. What can people do to make change to help eradicate racism, police brutality, and white supremacy and inequalities in all?
I mean, I think the biggest thing was to vote. The thing about voting is not an absolute solution. I think you have to stay engaged and in tune, where I think a lot of people kind of disengage after the election. It's like, oh, I did my part. But it's about, I think, as we've seen, like holding your elected officials accountable, staying in tune with like what they're doing and what they're not, what promises they have fulfilled or are fulfilling and which ones they aren't. And so I think that's something, being more informed on the day-to-day is something that I think we can take for granted, but it's really, really important.
Jocelyn Willoughby, thank you so much for being a gracious guest. You provided a lot of fresh perspective. It's going to be amazing to see how your career progresses both on the court and off the court as you look to enact change and help make this world a better place. So thank you so much for joining me on Bigger Than Sports, and we hope to see your career flourish in all aspects.
Thank you so much.